Tick-tock, tick-tock. Do you ever listen to the sound of a clock and wonder whose time is running out? Tonight, let me tell you of a town where the bells toll not once, but twice, ushering in an unholy ritual shrouded in darkness and despair. You may never look at midnight the same way again. Our story begins in the quaint, creaking town of Willowshade, nestled between whispering woods and a decaying river. For generations, its nights were punctuated by the grand toll of the old church bell, its chime embracing the edges of midnight. But then came the second chime, a sound that should never exist. 11:59. Darkness would creep in like a velvet fog, smothering the stars themselves. Midnight struck. The usual bell echoed out, reverberating through bone and sinew. But the second chime? That sound came when the thin veil between the living and the dead tore apart. A hollow, wet toll that seemed to originate from somewhere beneath reality itself. A phenomenon so feared that even the townsfolk would bolt their doors with iron locks, douse their lights, and pray to gods long forgotten, gods whose names they dared not speak aloud. Among them was Elara Weiss, a young teacher, fresh to Willowshade, scoffing at what she called provincial superstition. Elara preferred reason, empirical evidence, but reason does not serve well where ancient fear has laid its roots. The second chime of midnight? A childish urban legend, she thought, perpetuated by isolation and groupthink. Yet each night around that witching hour, she felt something unnatural creep beneath her skin, a heaviness in her chest, a soundless hum in the air that made her teeth ache, as if time itself had dug its claws deep into her existence and begun to pull. It began subtly. Shadows darker than the moonless sky danced across her walls, twisting and writhing in patterns that hurt her eyes. Dreams beckoned her, not with comfort, but with suffocating dread. Faces she did not know, should not know, murmured incoherent warnings. Scarred faces with hollowed eyes dripping black fluid that burned where it fell. She would wake gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat that smelled faintly of copper. But the townsfolk knew better than to speak of what comes after the second toll. They knew to stay silent, to pretend not to notice the occasional disappearance, the occasional night when the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. Especially when they saw Elara wander where they feared to tread, asking questions better left unasked. You see, Elara lived next door to Willowshade's great bell tower, a relic wrapped in ivy and secrets, a structure heavier with whispers than bricks. What happened there was written nowhere but etched into the pallid stares of those who knew its essence, into the trembling hands of the elderly who sometimes muttered about the debt in their sleep. Foolishly determined to face what the town feared, she vowed that very night to reach the bell at the moment of its forbidden second toll. 11:50. The murmur of her clock ticked louder than ever, each sound like a nail being driven into wood. With every tick, her doubts blossomed. Was she making a mistake? Her hands trembled as she dressed, as if her body was trying to resist her mind's commands. 12 strikes. Midnight's conventional sound resonated with deathly gravity. When the echoes faded, courage intertwined with rashness propelled her out the door. The air grew bitter, as though winter had died to be reborn in that instant, a cold that cut through layers of clothing and settled in her marrow. The town was eerily still, the world frozen moments away from time itself. No crickets chirped, no owls called. The very molecules of air seemed suspended, waiting. Her feet carried her to the curving pathways of the bell tower, and there it was. Willow-lined and damp against the night, it loomed like a mausoleum rather than architecture of stone. Its doors creaked not just under the force of her push, but as if mourning, searching for escape. Inside smelled of moss, rust, and something metallic that reminded her of blood drawn from ancient veins. She wasn't alone. In the desolate cloister of shadows stood a mangled figure. It was dressed in the historic grace of clerical robes, yet its skin peeled like rain-melted parchment, revealing glimpses of something writhing underneath. It held the giant bell's rope in its misshapen grasp, fingers too numerous, too long, bones visibly shifting beneath translucent flesh. It offered no utterance, no acknowledgement of her presence, yet Alara felt seen, felt known in ways that made her soul recoil. Paralyzed, yet emboldened in the absurdity of the situation, Alara implored it. "Why do you toll the bell twice?" But ask no questions where answers nest like crows, feeding on the carrion of ignorance. The being turned, bones cracking, tendons stretching with wet, tearing sounds. Its eyeless gaze shifted straight through her soul, through time itself. Where eyes should be were only hollow sockets filled with what looked like clock gears, eternally turning, grinding against each other. And with the agony of millennia between cracked jaws that unhinged too wide for any human face, it spoke. "The first toll marks the present. The second toll awakens the debt unpaid." The rope was yanked with inhuman strength, pulling upward rather than down, defying gravity, defying nature. Boom! The second toll roared, but it wasn't sound. It was pain given form. It was every scream that had ever existed compressed into a single moment. The tower walls seemed to rot inward upon themselves, time reversing, spilling abyssal ink across her vision. Reality fractured like glass, and through the cracks poured things, beings that had no right to exist in any sane universe. Screams reverberated beyond celestial bounds as the figure disintegrated into ash and detritus, only to reform behind her, before her, above her, everywhere at once. Roots and flesh sprouted in unnatural alliance, forming horrors with twisted limbs mangled into abominable points, emerging to crawl forth from spaces between seconds. She fled, but time itself warped her escape. The staircase stretched endlessly downward, each step taking her higher instead of lower. Doorways opened to reveal more doorways. Windows showed only reflections of her own terrified face. Aged, withered, decayed, reborn. Suddenly, there were 3 Alaras, then 7. They collided with themselves on dimensional edges. Past selves, future selves, selves that never were, and never should be. The space remaining on the clock forced her pasts and futures all together, until lost fragments squirmed painfully back together, merging and separating in ways that defied comprehension. Dawn was not coming. At least not for her. For Alara, there would only be midnight, again and again. An eternal moment trapped between tolls. Upon finding her spirit-anguished body motionless under the collapsed bell rope the next morning, the mayor whispered to no one but the offered emptiness of air. She heard it wrong. They always do. His eyes, unnaturally bright, reflected no light as he turned away. The other townsfolk shamelessly refused acknowledgement, averting their gaze from the tower, from the body, from each other, restraining history as always. Children were kept indoors that day, and no one spoke of the strange marks found on Alara's skin, symbols that resembled clock faces, all frozen at midnight. And so the Willowshade Bell Tower endures its cursed post, animating time's most specter-fed machine. Yet soon, another betrothed naif will arrive. Another curious soul who dismisses warnings as folklore, another sacrifice to settle the debt that keeps Willowshade suspended in borrowed time. Perhaps you've heard of a quaint little town, recently looking for a new school teacher. They say the night air is crisp, the people friendly, if a bit reserved. The church bell only rings once at midnight. They'll assure you with tight smiles and eyes that don't quite meet yours. But should ever the echoes mean anything to you, should you ever hear what should not be heard, never attempt their place should fate's hour ring. Twice. For the debt must be paid. And time, dear listener, is running out. Tick-tock, tick-tock.